You're hiking in the Alps. It's September, the weather's clear, and you've wandered slightly off the marked trail because you saw something interesting near a melting patch of ice. You get closer. There's something dark sticking out of the glacier. A piece of leather, maybe. Some old fabric. You crouch down and brush away the slush, and you're looking at a human shoulder. You have just found a body. You assume it's recent, a climber who fell maybe a few years ago. You call the authorities. They send a recovery team with a jackhammer. They chip the body out of the ice with the care and precision of someone extracting a parking meter from frozen concrete. They damage it. Badly. They tear the clothing. They puncture the hip with the jackhammer. They don't realize what they have. What they have is a 5,300-year-old man, frozen in nearly perfect condition since roughly 3,300 BCE, carrying equipment so advanced it will rewrite what scientists thought they knew about the Copper Age. And they just went at him with a pneumatic drill. This is the story of Ötzi the Iceman, and almost everything about him is stranger than the fact that he existed at all. On September 19th, 1991, two German hikers named Helmut and Erika Simon were crossing the Ötztal Alps on the Austrian-Italian border when they spotted what they thought was a recently deceased mountaineer half embedded in melting ice. They were off by about 5 millennia. The body lay face down in a shallow gully at an elevation of 3,210 meters. Parts of the torso and the back of the head were exposed. The rest was still locked in ice. The Simons photographed the body and reported it to the authorities, who assumed it was one of the dozens of missing hikers the Alps give back every few years as glaciers shift and retreat. Over the next several days, multiple recovery attempts were made, each one more damaging than the last. An Austrian gendarme tried to free the body with a jackhammer. A ski pole found near the body was broken during extraction. A fur garment was torn. The body's left hip was punctured by the pneumatic tool. Nobody was being careless. They genuinely believed they were recovering a modern corpse. There was no reason to suspect otherwise. Then a University of Innsbruck archaeologist named Konrad Spindler saw the body and the artifacts that had been recovered alongside it. He examined the copper axe. He looked at the construction of the shoes. And he reportedly said something to the effect of, "This body is at least 4,000 years old." He was underestimating. Radiocarbon dating placed Otzi's death between 3350 and 3100 BCE. That makes him a contemporary of the earliest stages of Stonehenge, older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, and roughly 1,500 years older than the founding of Rome. He lived during the Copper Age, a transitional period between the Stone Age and the Bronze Age that most people have never heard of because it gets about 3 sentences in the average history textbook. And here's what makes Ötzi genuinely extraordinary. He wasn't a skeleton. He wasn't fragments. He was a complete, naturally mummified human being with skin, organs, hair, fingernails, and the contents of his last 2 meals still identifiable in his stomach and intestines. The glacier had freeze-dried him. No bacteria could survive at that altitude and temperature, so decomposition simply never started. He was sealed in ice within days or weeks of his death and remained frozen, untouched, for 53 centuries. The Alps had accidentally built the most effective preservation chamber in archaeological history. The equipment he was carrying rewrote textbooks. His axe had a copper blade, not stone, not bronze. Pure copper, hafted to a U-handle with leather straps and birch tar adhesive. Before Ötzi, the conventional understanding was that copper smelting in the Alpine region didn't begin until several centuries later. His axe pushed the timeline back and proved that sophisticated metalworking was happening earlier than anyone had assumed, in communities that weren't supposed to have it yet. His clothing was engineered for survival in high-altitude conditions. He wore a coat made from the hides of at least 4 different animal species: goat, sheep, cattle, and deer, stitched together in vertical strips. His leggings were goat hide. His shoes had bearskin soles with deer hide uppers, stuffed with dried grass for insulation. This was not primitive. This was somebody who understood exactly how cold it gets at 3,000 meters and dressed accordingly. He carried a longbow made from yew, unfinished, still being shaped. He had a quiver with 14 arrow shafts, only 2 of which were complete with flint points and feather fletching. He carried a flint knife with an ash handle. He had a birch bark container that appeared to have held embers wrapped in fresh leaves, a portable fire-starting kit. He was not wandering. He was equipped. Every item was purpose-built, well-maintained, and designed for a specific function. This was a man who knew how to live in the mountains, and his gear reflected thousands of years of accumulated technological knowledge that nobody had realized existed at that scale in 3300 BCE. Then they found the Arrowhead. In 2001, a full decade after the discovery, a radiologist re-examining the body noticed a small, dense object lodged in Otzi's left shoulder. It was a flint arrowhead. It had entered from behind, severed a major artery, and embedded itself in the bone near the shoulder blade. Otzi was murdered. The arrow wound would have caused massive internal bleeding. He would have lost consciousness within minutes and died shortly after. The arrowhead was still inside. The shaft had been pulled out, either by Otzi himself or by his attacker, but the stone point remained lodged too deep to remove. Further examination found a deep cut on his right hand, consistent with a defensive wound, the kind you get when you grab a blade that someone is swinging at you. His last hours came into focus. He had been in a violent confrontation within the days before his death. DNA analysis of his clothing and weapons found traces of blood from 4 different people. 2 on one arrowhead, 1 on his knife, 1 on his coat. He had fought multiple opponents. He had wounded at least one of them. And then someone shot him in the back from a distance while he was at high altitude, in a rocky gully with no cover. The contents of his stomach showed that he had eaten a full meal: dried ibex meat, einkorn wheat, and some kind of plant material, roughly 2 hours before he died. He wasn't starving. He wasn't lost. He had eaten, rested, and then somebody killed him. 5,300 years later, the ice gave him back, and we could read the whole story in his stomach, his blood, his wounds, and his gear. Not a king, not a monument. A person with a knife wound on his hand and a meal in his stomach, who died alone in the mountains because someone wanted him dead. Here's the part that stays with you. Otzi is currently displayed in a specially designed refrigerated chamber at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy. The room is kept at -6 degrees Celsius with 99% humidity. A small window lets visitors look in at the body. He weighs about 13 kilograms. Millions of people have stood at that window. They're not looking at a pharaoh wrapped in linen or a skull behind glass. They're looking at a person, with skin, with tattoos, 61 of them, small clusters of lines, grouped over his lower back, knees, ankles, and wrists, possibly therapeutic, positioned along acupuncture-like points, with fingernails, with the wound that killed him still visible in his shoulder. He lived in a world without writing, without metal coins, without wheels on roads. But he had a copper axe, insulated shoes, a fire-starting kit, and a coat built from 4 different animals because one kind of leather wasn't warm enough. He solved the same problems you solve every morning: staying warm, carrying food, making tools that work, with materials he gathered from the landscape around him. So the next time you zip up a jacket that was designed on a computer and manufactured on another continent and delivered to your door by a truck you never saw, consider that 5,000 years ago, someone stitched 4 different animal hides together by hand to do the same job, and it worked well enough to survive 53 centuries in a glacier. He didn't leave a name. He left his coat, his axe, his last meal, and an arrowhead in his shoulder. And that told us more about his world than most written histories ever could.